I want you to just take a second and look at your window. Or just, picture the driveway outside your home right now.
Yeah, usually you just see a parked car, right?
Exactly. And if you're like most people, your relationship with that car is incredibly one-dimensional. It gets you from point A to point B, and, well, it drains your wallet.
Right. It's basically a depreciating piece of metal and plastic.
Yeah, it just sits there doing absolutely nothing for like 95% of its lifespan, just collecting pollen or snow while you pay insurance on it. But what if that electric vehicle sitting in the driveway wasn't just, a consumer of resources?
What if it was actually the sprawling, rolling battery?
Right. A battery capable of keeping your house powered through a multi-day blackout, or even serving as, like, a structural pillar for the local power grid.
It really forces a complete reevaluation of what a car actually is. I mean, we are crossing this threshold where a vehicle transitions from being a liability on the energy grid to being a critical supplier of, stabilization and storage.
And that is exactly what we are exploring in today's deep dive. We're looking at the state of electric vehicle charging as of May 2026.
And to really understand what's happening, we're pulling from two very distinct sources for you today.
Yeah, first we have this really concrete update from EVChargingStations.com and Tom Moloney. He's reviewing the highly visible state of Walmart EV charging network.
Which represents the world we see every day.
Exactly. But the second source is where things get wild. It's an April 2026 presentation delivered to the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, or SMUD.
Right, given by Zach Worgan, the executive director of the Vehicle Grid Integration Council, or the VGIC.
And this presentation outlines an invisible infrastructure that is quietly being built right under our noses.
And, whether you own an EV or you're maybe on the fence about buying one, or honestly, even if you just pay a monthly electric bill, the fundamental architecture of how power moves through our communities is being rewritten.
Right. This shift dictates how resilient your neighborhood will be during the next extreme weather event.
Exactly. And it directly impacts the underlying costs that dictate your utility rates.
So, we should probably start with the infrastructure everyone already understands. When you say EV charging today, most people picture that landscape Tom Moloney is reviewing.
Yeah, you pull into a Walmart parking lot, you find a public DC fast charger, and you plug your car in.
Right. It gulps down this vast amount of electricity in 20 minutes, and you drive away. The relationship is so simple, the grid generates the power, and the car consumes it.
But that VGIC presentation pulls back the curtain on this concept called VGI, which completely upends that whole one-way street.
So VGI, break that down for us.
Yeah, so VGI stands for Vehicle Grid Integration. It's an umbrella term, and the VGIC breaks it down into specific tiers of interaction. The baseline tier is managed charging.
Okay, so that's where the car and the grid communicate, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. The utility company incentivizes the vehicle to shift its power draw to off-peak hours. So charging at, say, 2 in the morning when wind energy is abundant and demand is low, rather than at 6 in the evening when everyone is getting home and cooking dinner.
I mean, that seems logical, but it's still fundamentally a one-way transfer. The car is still just taking power.
It is, yeah. Which is why the presentation quickly moves to the more transformative tiers, which is bidirectional charging.
Where power flows both ways.
Right. And it comes in two distinct configurations. The first is grid-isolated bidirectional charging. The industry term for this is islanding.
Islanding. Okay, how does that work?
Basically, your car sends power directly into your home's electrical panel, but a physical transfer switch completely cuts your house off from the broader utility grid.
Oh, so it operates exactly like a backup generator during a storm. The grid goes down, your house isolates itself so it doesn't accidentally electrocute a lineman working on the wires down the street.
Yes, exactly.
And the car just keeps your refrigerator and your lights running.
That is the physical mechanism, yeah. And then you have the ultimate tier, which is grid parallel bidirectional charging.
Okay, grid parallel.
In this setup, your vehicle is officially interconnected with the utility company. It is actively pushing power backward through your meter and out onto the broader neighborhood grid.
Wow, to stabilize voltage or supply energy during peak demand.
Exactly.
Like, we currently treat EVs the same way we treat our smartphones. You plug your phone into the wall, it takes power until the battery hits 100%, and that is the end of the transaction.
Right, it's purely a consumer.
But the VGIC is arguing that we need to view these vehicles as energy bank accounts. You can make deposits from the grid, but you should also be able to make withdrawals, pushing that energy back out when the grid is strained.
And to grasp why utility companies are suddenly so interested in your car's bank account, we have to look at this specific statistic from the California Energy Commission that was in the presentation.
Oh yeah, this number blew my mind.
As of their latest data, the electric vehicles currently driving around California house 18.5 gigawatts of energy storage capacity.
Let's put that number into perspective for a second, because gigawatts can feel a bit abstract.
Yeah, consider the stationary energy storage in California. The state has spent billions of dollars over years deliberately building massive lithium-ion battery facilities to store solar power for use after the sun goes down.
Right.
All of those permanent stationary batteries combined total about 15 gigawatts of storage.
Wait, really? So consumers, just by going out and buying cars for their daily commutes, have accidentally built a larger battery network than the state's entire purpose-built utility storage system.
Yes, the batteries are already manufactured, they're already sitting in driveways, and they are fully funded by private citizens.
That is nuts. It is an immense reservoir of potential energy that, like we said earlier, currently sits idle 95% of the time.
Exactly.
So if we have 18.5 gigawatts of power just sitting in people's garages, the natural question is how we actually tap into it.
Right, how do we make it real?
Because for years, the idea of powering your house with your car felt like a concept car feature that would never actually reach production. But looking at the sources, the hardware is already here.
It really is.
Instead of rattling off every car on the market, let's look at how this is being deployed right now. A prime example is the Ford F-150 Lightning, paired with their Charge Station Pro.
Yeah, that's a big one.
You park in your garage, plug the truck in, and if a summer storm knocks out the power lines, the system automatically islands your house. And the truck's battery is so large, it can run a typical home for days without breaking a sweat.
And we are seeing that capability integrated into platforms across the industry now, from the Nissan Leaf with the D-Subaru Ara to the Chevy Silverado and the Kia EV9.
Right, and the Tesla Cybertruck with
Wow.
universal wall connector.
Yeah.
Grid-isolated home backup is rapidly becoming an expected feature.
It is, but the true vanguard for the grid parallel side, actually sending power back to the utility, that is not being led by passenger vehicles.
Really? Who's leading it?
The heavy lifting is actually being done by electric school buses.
Oh, school buses. Okay, I can see the logic there for a municipal fleet.
Yeah, the operational profile of a school bus is perfectly suited for grid stabilization. Brands like Bluebird and BYD are outfitting these buses with heavy-duty bidirectional chargers capable of pushing 60 to 66 kilowatts of power each.
That's a massive amount of power.
It is. The VGIC highlights a specific deployment in Oakland, California, where 74 electric school buses are actively participating in the program right now.
Wow, 74 buses. It makes sense physically. I mean, they have enormous battery packs, their routes are highly predictable, and crucially, they sit idle during the late afternoon throughout the summer.
Right, exactly when the grid needs help.
Right. A sweltering July afternoon is the exact moment a power grid is stretched to its absolute breaking point with everyone running their air conditioning. So the school district essentially transforms into a virtual power plant. But, I struggle to see how that scales to the individual level. A fleet manager gets paid to optimize city assets, but an everyday driver is highly protective of their vehicle.
Oh, for sure. Range anxiety is a real thing.
Yeah. If I plug in my SUV after work, I am expecting a full charge the next morning. I'm not going to let the utility company drain my battery while I sleep just to keep the neighborhood's lights on.
And that anxiety around range depletion is the primary behavioral hurdle. But the VGIC addresses it by looking at the evolution of the technology.
How so?
Well, from 2008 to roughly 2023, vehicles grid was largely an academic exercise, restricted to small, highly controlled demonstrations. But the timeline shows 2026 as a major tipping point into commercial reality.
So we're moving past just testing it in the lab.
Exactly. We are seeing massive pilots explicitly designed to solve that consumer anxiety right now. Tesla has an active exporting pilot running in Texas. And Pacific Gas and Electric is launching a vehicle-to-everything pilot aiming for up to 1,000 residential customers.
Okay, but how do those pilots actually protect the driver's morning commute?
Through aggressive software guardrails.
Guardrails?
Yeah, when you enroll, you set absolute parameters in your manufacturer's app. You might stipulate that the utility can draw power from your vehicle between 5 p.m. and 8 p.m., but they can never drain the battery below, say, 70%.
Okay, ensuring you always have more than enough range for your daily driving.
Right. The utility only ever gets access to the surplus that you explicitly authorize.
Okay, so if the software guarantees I won't be stranded, the next logical question is motivation. What is the actual financial incentive for an everyday driver to participate?
Money talks, right. And the VGIC aggregates several really comprehensive studies to answer that, looking at the economics from a macro grid perspective all the way down to the micro individual level.
Let's start with the macro.
Okay, so on the macro side, a study from the Union of Concerned Scientists modeled the California grid. They found that merely implementing managed charging, just coordinating when vehicles pull power, can save the electrical system $4.2 billion by 2045.
$4.2 billion just from timing the charging better.
Exactly. And if you enable bidirectional exporting, that unlocks an additional $3.5 billion in savings. And that is assuming only 12.5% of EV owners even opt in.
Wow. And the nationwide figures present an even steeper curve.
Yeah, they do.
Because there's that study by the Brattle Group and EV.Energy. They estimate active managed charging could create $13 billion in avoided costs across the country by 2035, with bidirectional capability adding another $12 billion.
And the term avoided costs is the key to understanding where all this money actually comes from.
Right, explain that.
Without this technology, as energy demand grows, utilities are forced to build what are known as peaker plants. These are highly expensive, often polluting power plants that only turn on for a few hours a year during extreme demand spikes.
Oh, just to handle the absolute peak load.
Exactly. And they also have to dig up streets to upgrade substations and transformers to handle that load. But if you have millions of batteries already distributed across the neighborhoods, releasing power exactly where and when it is needed, the utility doesn't have to build those billion-dollar peaker plants.
So the utility saves billions by not pouring concrete. But how does that translate into cash for the person who actually owns the car?
Well, the savings are passed down to incentivize participation. At the micro level, the VGIC points to a Stanford University study demonstrating that an EV owner could earn an annual profit of $1,181 simply by exporting power back to the grid during peak pricing events.
Of $1,181, that's not pocket change.
No, it's not. And another analysis from UC Irvine suggests the value of vehicle-to-grid could climb to $2,850 per vehicle annually.
That is wild. Generating $1,200 or $2,000 a year fundamentally alters the economics of ownership. It is literally the equivalent of your vehicle generating enough income while parked to pay its own insurance premium and registration fees.
Exactly. And even if a driver chooses not to export a single watt back to the neighborhood, the financial case remains strong.
How so? Just from islanding?
Yeah, utilizing grid-isolated bidirectional charging to power your own home during the most expensive peak utility hours can yield over $300 a year in savings.
Yo, because you're avoiding buying power when it's most expensive.
Right. The financial delta between simple smart charging, known as V2G, and active exporting, known as V2G, proves that the technology is now backed by really tangible economics.
Okay, so the hardware exists, the software protects the driver, and the financial incentives are compelling. So why isn't every single EV owner doing this today?
The million-dollar question.
Right. The VGIC presentation spends significant time outlining the roadblocks to scaling this up. They focus on 4 pillars: energization and interconnection, compensation mechanisms, upfront cost support, and technical standards.
Let's look at the upfront costs first, because that's a big hurdle.
Yeah, a bidirectional charger. And the electrical panel upgrades required to handle a two-way flow of power represent a really substantial upfront capital expenditure.
They absolutely do, which is why state agencies and utilities are offering heavy subsidies to bridge the gap right now while hardware costs come down over time.
And for the heavy-duty commercial fleets, the numbers are just staggering. Portland General Electric offers up to $60,000 per school bus charger.
Yeah.
And the state of California has an adder that provides up to $95,000 for a zero-emission school bus charger.
I know, a $95,000 subsidy for a single charging station sounds exorbitant at first glance.
It sounds completely crazy.
But it reflects the physical reality of the installation. Interconnecting a 66-kilowatt bidirectional charger for a bus often requires trenching through concrete, laying high-voltage lines, and completely overhauling a depot's electrical infrastructure.
Okay, that makes sense. You're basically building a small substation.
Pretty much. And on the residential side, the subsidies are scaled to the homeowner, but they remain really robust. California's REWDS program offers residents up to $13,800, while the Connecticut Green Bank offers up to $10,000 to offset equipment and installation.
Okay, so the equipment is getting subsidized, And we established that the ongoing compensation, like what the utility pays you for the power, is strong. I mean, programs in New England and Colorado are paying roughly $240 to $250 per kilowatt year.
Yep, the money is there.
But the pillar that seems the most problematic to me is interconnection.
Oh, definitely.
Because interconnection is the process of getting the utility company's official permission to connect a power-generating asset to their grid. And anyone who has tried to install residential solar panels knows this can be a total bureaucratic labyrinth.
Oh, a nightmare.
Yeah, often resulting in months of waiting just to get permission to flip a switch. So if a homeowner buys a bidirectional charger, are they going to be tangled in utility red tape for months just to use their car as a battery?
You've hit the nail on the head. Interconnection is undeniably the tightest bottleneck in this entire transition. The VGIC's core advocacy here is a plea for utilities not to reinvent the wheel.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning regulatory frameworks for connecting residential power already exist for the solar industry. In California, they utilize Rule 21 for direct current equipment and established non-Rule 21 pathways for alternating current systems.
Okay.
The VGIC is pushing states to adopt these existing frameworks rather than creating entirely new bureaucracies just for vehicles.
But wait, should a homeowner who only wants to back up their own house be subject to the same review process as someone trying to sell power back to the grid?
That's a huge point of contention, and the VGIC argues aggressively against that. Their stance is that load-only or islanded systems, setups that physically disconnect from the grid during an outage and cannot push power outward, they should require little to zero interconnection review.
Because there's no risk to the grid.
Exactly. If a system poses no risk of backfeeding power onto the utilities lines, the utility has no operational reason to delay the installation.
Right, keep the friction low for the people who just want home resilience.
Exactly. The presentation emphasizes that customers should be permitted to easily install these islanded systems today, with the flexibility to seamlessly upgrade to grid parallel exporting later through software updates if they choose to join a virtual power plant program.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, unlocking that 18.5 gigawatts of stored potential relies entirely on creating a frictionless customer experience. If the interconnection process is grueling, consumers will simply charge their cars normally, and the grid will forfeit billions of dollars in potential stabilization.
Wow. We started this deep dive looking at the straightforward reality of the public fast-charging network. Those visible Walmart stations where energy flows one way and the transaction is simple.
Like the traditional model.
But the VGIC presentation illuminates a much more complex and honestly rewarding future that is actively deploying right now.
Yeah.
We are looking at a landscape where the vehicles parked in our neighborhoods collectively hold more storage capacity than the entire stationary utility grid.
It's mind-blowing when you really think about it.
It is. Electric school buses are already proving the concept, operating as localized power plants during peak summer hours. And there are real financial frameworks emerging that can turn an everyday driver's vehicle from an expense into an asset, provided we can, streamline the bureaucratic processes holding it back.
And as we transition from testing to widespread deployment, it leaves us with a really profound structural question to mull over.
What's that?
Well, if millions of cars become a contractually compensated load-bearing pillar of the electrical grid, if your vehicle is mathematically relied upon to prevent rolling blackouts during an extreme heat wave, how does that alter our traditional concept of ownership?
Oh, wow.
If the stability of the neighborhood relies on the battery sitting in your driveway, whose car is it really during those critical peak evening hours?
That is a fascinating question to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the shifting currents of our energy infrastructure. The next time you walk past an electric vehicle, you might just be looking at the foundation of the future grid.